News alert, a big day for health care. Senate Republicans getting a first look at a draft of their party's bill to repeal and replace Obamacare. But Democrats aren't happy, calling it even worse than the House bill. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. Here today, Harris Faulkner, Meghan McCain, former deputy spokesperson for the State Department, Marie Harf, and today's #OneLuckyGuy, the host of the David Webb Show on the Sirius XM Patriot channel. David Webb is here, and he is outnumbered, and I cannot wait to hear what you have to say on this moment right now.
I've had 3 hours of what to say on this moment. You know what I've said? Join me right here on Outnumbered.
Yeah, I love that about you, by the way. Your new show is rocking at XM right across the street.
Yeah, I come right across the street. I have 3 hours to set everybody up, and they're looking at this healthcare discussion. Right before I came here, I played the Senate floor, and you could, between Patty Murray, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, I mean, it's 185 pages. Nobody's read it, but they've all decried on it.
All right.
It is fun to watch.
Save it, because we got to get a report first. The Senate GOP leadership unveiling for the first time a 142-page discussion draft of their health care bill. The measure would cut and revamp Medicaid and repeal tax increases under Obamacare. President Trump weighing in on a short time ago, calling Obamacare a disaster and saying hopefully we'll get something with heart. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says this bill is even worse than the one passed in the House.
It's every bit as bad as the House bill. In some ways, it's even worse. The president said the Senate bill needed heart. The way this bill cuts health care is heartless. The president said the House bill was mean. The Senate bill may be meaner. The Senate Republican health care bill is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Only this wolf has even sharper teeth than the House bill.
But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says Democrats are wrong.
Sound like Obamacare is working? Now Democrats would tell us it'd be wrong for the Senate to actually address these problems in a serious way, while the law they've defended for 7 years teeters, literally teeters on the edge of total collapse. They were wrong before, they're wrong again now.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel in the middle of it all, live from Capitol Hill. What's the latest, Mike?
Well, Sandra, it's hot off the presses, and Republican senators are reading it at this hour to see if they can support it. Senate Republican leaders say this new health care proposal would stabilize collapsing insurance markets, would not contain a requirement to purchase insurance, would improve affordability of health insurance, would preserve access to care for pre-existing conditions, and would strengthen Medicaid by giving states more flexibility. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says lawmakers have an obligation to address this problem.
We agree on the need to stabilize the insurance markets that are collapsing under Obamacare as well, and policies contained in the discussion draft will implement stabilization policies so we can bring financial certainty to insurance markets and hope to Americans who face the possibility of limited or zero options next year under Obamacare.
Healthcare is, of course, all the buzz here today on Capitol Hill. McConnell's in a tight spot, needing almost all of his 52 Republicans to support this plan. GOP leaders hope to get the analysis from the Congressional Budget Office in terms of price and impact as soon as tomorrow or perhaps Monday. Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer was quick to attack the new bill.
We know that the Republicans and Democrats had differences when we debated the Affordable Care Act. At least we had a debate. At least we had committee hearings and a process. And more broadly than that, at least we Democrats were trying to pass a health care bill that helped more Americans afford insurance and tried to bring costs down.
McConnell fired back that Schumer had not even read the bill since it was just posted on the Senate budget website. Here is something that will get the attention of Republican leaders. A very good source tells me in about an hour, a statement is due out from at least 3 Republican senators saying they cannot support the bill. If that holds, that would be enough to stop this bill from passing in the United States Senate. Sandra?
Rand Paul.
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you. Some discussion on the couch here already.
Absolutely, because that was interesting there at the end, right?
And it really sets things up. Can we go first to Chuck Schumer's comments there?
Yeah.
And McConnell sort of went after him saying, hold on a second, this literally just posted, but yet you're already saying that this is heartless and will never work. So this is a very confusing process.
See,
Make it simpler.
the timing actually shows Chuck Schumer for what he is, which is a partisan act. I had this on my show, and we were watching the Senate floor. He didn't have time to read it after it was posted, but he was ready with a prepared statement. But this is the problem. The Democrats are not interested in even reading the bill, debating the bill. They simply want to go out and attack it. They say that only Democrats, that's what Chuck Schumer says, only Democrats want to do something to help the American people. But in a listening session yesterday on Obamacare, Secretary Price and others sat there in the White House with Americans who were harmed. They were the victims, as a matter of fact, of Obamacare. What about helping them?
It does seem like they're sticking on that message, Marie.
Well, look, we had hundreds of hours of committee hearings about Obamacare. We are not going to have any committee hearings about this. There's only going to be at most 20 hours of debate on the Senate floor for something that touches 1/6 of our economy. No Democrats were asked to be part of the drafting process. Most Republicans weren't asked to be part of it. So I agree, we should read the bill. We should get a CBO score, which hopefully will come later this week or early next week. And then we should talk about what's in it. But if it cuts Medicaid like we've seen it will, 1/5 of Americans get their coverage from Medicaid, 2/3 of Americans in nursing homes. If they lose that coverage because of the deep cuts to Medicaid that will likely come from this, people like John Kasich, a Republican who runs my home state of Ohio, they don't like that, and voters won't like that.
But it's not a cut of Medicaid, it's a phase down, which has been a compromise for moderates. And when you're talking about the statement that's going to come out, it's being reported that it's Rand Paul. This is no surprise. The same problems that happened in the Congress are now manifesting themselves in the Senate, if this is even able to get through. Because the compromise, we knew one way or another there would be one, and it looks like they hedged towards more moderates at this point. People like John Kasich. I think that we are hedging ourselves in a way that is a little tenuous right now with these timelines. And again, Orrin Hatch just said there are a lot of differing points of view on healthcare, the healthcare bill, which is a real problem in pushing it through. Orrin Hatch.
So we know they had a...
Can I just address Ohio real quick, Harris? Sorry.
We know that they had a working group, and it was exactly what you said, Megan. It was conservatives and centrists. And so that's kind of how we got to the language, as I understand it, where we are. 142 pages of this discussion draft. It drops the mandate. It eliminates taxes on the wealthy with regard to their health care. So it does a couple of things that people were talking about in terms of loosening up the market, if you will. You may peel off a Ted Cruz. You may not get Rand Paul, but you may peel off a Ted Cruz, because this rolls back almost all of Obamacare. So it's like repeal in quotes, if you will. And Ted Cruz, we know, and Rand Paul really wanted to see a repeal. And you may get him if Cruz's language can come in about the across-state competition of insurance companies. So they may be able to get back 2 or 3 of those Republicans. But I don't know what Rand Paul is after.
You may lose Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins on the Planned Parenthood issue. You may lose people like Jeff Flake, Dean Heller, people who have tough races who are getting hit with ads already. So I'm not sure it ever. Do you think it'll pass the Senate?
Listen, I think we have, since the incarnation of this, been ahead over our skis. We'd have 7 years to get this right. And I don't understand why we can't find some kind of compromise. I think anything is better than Obamacare. Absolutely anything. And if we're looking for absolute purity and perfection, it's never going to pass, because like you're saying, the Republican Party is filled with lots of different perspectives, lots of different constituents to answer to, and I'm really fascinated to see what Rand Paul's going to say.
So Mitch McConnell just said, I think we will vote next week, but I don't know that we'll have 50 votes next week. Can he get conservatives and moderates on board here?
We don't know. This is the thing. Back to Megan's point, there are differing views on this, vastly different from what the Democrats did when they lockstep, didn't read a bill, when Nancy Pelosi said pass it before you know what's in it, and they went ahead and put this pox on the American people.
Just hit
and by the
she
way,
was talking to her own people.
Right. And by the way, back to Ohio for a moment with John Kasich and taking the expansion, it is about reducing that. One of the proposals in the House, over 5 years, federal money, our taxpayer dollars, would not go to pay for it. Kasich took it, put it into his general budget, in essence, to hide his big spending. He is not a big fiscal Republican. And in Ohio, Anthem is leaving Ohio, and 20 counties will lose their access to other health care options.
Yeah,
so
they've already
Obama
left Ohio.
and they've left Indiana
Wisconsin
and Wisconsin and Indiana.
Yeah.
But Anthem, one of the reasons, and they gave a few reasons for leaving those markets, one of them was the uncertainty that's been created by the congressional Republican process. And it's also Obamacare, it's other things. I'm not totally blaming it on that. But the uncertainty around this process, the false deadline saying vote by July 4th or move on to tax reform, that is adding to the uncertainty in the healthcare market. And when you talk about things like the opioid crisis, I was home in Ohio last week. I talked to a lot of folks about this. A huge majority, in some places over 90% of people getting treatment in the opioid crisis get it through Medicaid. And if we are willing to phase that out, bring that down, I think a lot of voters are going to be uncomfortable with that.
You know, by the numbers, I get it. It's a great headline on the opioid crisis, and I've covered this from day one with Chris Sununu in New Hampshire and other governors. I've known Chris for many years. Is that is not the big number. Bringing it to the headline doesn't reflect the fact that over 70% of Americans get their health care through private employers, how the marketplace really works, rather than selling down and trying to basically destroy the broader system to fix it for a few. Go to the problem of fixing it for the few that need it, rather than destroying a marketplace. And Obamacare destroyed the marketplace.
I want to jump in here with some video. We've got some video of the protesters that right now that are outside Senator Mitch McConnell's office being carried and removed. We're told now the video is coming in, so we'll watch this here. They say cuts to Medicaid bill and Senate bill mean life or death to people with disabilities. So we're keeping an eye on Mitch McConnell's office outside. There have been protesters outside of there, but now we're being told that they are being carried and removed from there. Just to give you an idea of the climate that we are in right now.
The passion around this issue is huge, and of course we saw that playing out in the town halls, and now you've got it out literally in a hallway outside Mitch McConnell's office. Not surprising. I know they were interviewing Senator John Thune on Happening Now about an hour ago, and you could barely hear him, the cacophony of the protests from below and behind him. You know, I would say this. It's called the Better Care Reconciliation Act of 2017. Republicans have got to now show how it would be better care.
That's right.
And the messaging on this has got to be really strong. So you've seen a couple of things here recently that were impressive in terms of a consistency of message from the Republicans who've been, you know, tweeting about it, talking about it. The president, again this morning, talking about it after talking last night. I mean, you've got a drumbeat. He's had people to the White House to talk about the flaws and the disruption in the lives that Obamacare has caused, both for small businesses and families. So that Better Care Reconciliation Act part, that title, if you will, has really got to be walked out as it's rolled out. But it hit me when you were talking about Nancy Pelosi. She might have been talking to her own people, telling them not to read it so it would pass. I think a lot of us interpreted that, well, no one's reading it, just pass it. But it's interesting because that may be one of the ways that Democrats avoided the dissension within their party. If you're not reading it, then you can't fight about it.
Right. If you don't actually, and by the way, this is a discussion draft. They've made a big deal out of this, but what does a discussion do? It opens up the table for this. And by the way, the president has also asked Democrats repeatedly, from the campaign trail to now, to come to the table. Let's try to solve the problems. If the CBC won't meet with the president over their own reasons, and other Democrats won't even recognize his presidency, then how do you expect to work with Democrats?
It's not even that. I'm curious, just as a political spectator, to see how President Trump is going to take his Twitter account against Rand Paul and people that aren't going to end up voting on this bill. He threatened to go to the primaries with people who did it in Congress, and it'll be fascinating to see if he ends up sort of taking it to the mattresses on Twitter.
And just to reiterate, Mike Emanuel is reporting at least 3 GOP senators are expected to come out with a statement approximately 1 p.m. announcing that they are against this bill, which could be significant. So we'll keep watching for that. President Trump, meanwhile, making a big policy announcement last night in Iowa. Why he says immigrants coming to the U.S. should be prepared to pull their own weight. Plus, grim news for Democrats, including Hillary Clinton. The new polls and fundraising totals showing the party heading in the wrong direction.
Well, this was a hot topic in the commercial break. President Trump made a big policy announcement last night in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, during his rally. He told supporters that immigrants coming to the United States should be ready to support themselves on day one.
That's why I believe the time has come for new immigration rules which say that those seeking admission into our country must be able to support themselves financially and should not use welfare for a period of at least 5 years. And we'll be putting in legislation to that effect very shortly.
The legislation would presumably build on President Clinton's 1996 welfare overhaul that was rolled back during the previous 2 administrations. All right, so that was the discussion point during the break on that particular thing. First of all, Maria, I want to go to you first and ask, okay, 1996, well, what happened?
So I don't have all the details on this, but I do know, and I've read that there was basically the same bill passed in 1996, signed by President Clinton, that said immigrants could not get federally based benefits for 5 years. There were a few exceptions, like kids getting immunizations, which is a public health good, I think emergency disaster relief. The discussion here was, has it been enforced? Has it been working? And could it get better? And I'm not an expert on that. If it can get better, I'm certainly open to ways that might happen. But the concept that President Trump announced last night is already on the books. It's already law.
I was kidding when I said, has it been working? It hasn't. That's how we got here. So, David, what happens next?
What happens is we need to have it codified, and Congress needs to get involved. A lot of times, as you know, when laws are passed, you get into the regulatory period where they make the regulations and they work to get this process in place. The process has failed. Workfare worked in its general principle. This Republican plan and the Republican takeover in '94 started a process that Democrats began to push and roll back. And given benefits to people, we should be means testing our immigrants. If you want to come to this country, you should be able to provide basically a benefit. You should have a job, a skill. We can't just import poverty. And the problem is, by creating welfare programs that can be used by people who come to this country, we're importing poverty on the economic scale.
So you know the pushback with that. And Republicans wear this a lot, Megan. You know it's true. It's, well, does that make you seem heartless when you say you don't want to import people who have...
I've got the perfect answer. What happens economically when America becomes the place that is no longer capable of welcoming those people to this country because we are economically unsound? We're $20 trillion in debt. We have an issue taking care of our own problems and our own people, and we are supposed to import poverty and people who will bring us down economically.
$20 trillion and rising.
$20 trillion and rising, yeah.
So before we address how Democrats are responding to this, I'll ask you, is this playing well with Trump's base? I mean, is this seen as him following through on his campaign promises?
It's the whole point of it. It's the whole point. I'm sorry, but this is red meat rhetoric for his base. He won on immigration and jobs. Whether or not this is the #1 issue he's talking about, this is completely tribal. His base loves it, loves nothing more. I haven't seen any legislation put up to amend the legislation that's already in place. Let's not pretend he's not campaigning right now. He did a big rally last night, and I just think this is completely red meat politics for his base.
But it's not only for the base, because I'll tell you what, as someone
But nothing rabble-rouses the base like talking about immigration and jobs.
I'm talking about the voters. When you go to Romeo, Michigan, when you go to the assembly plants in Chicago for UAW, and I do, and you talk to these workers, you've got 250,000 people in UAW Ford alone. You look at them. They don't want their jobs in their communities brought down economically. They're talking about kitchen table economics, and when someone takes a benefit that they work to pay taxes for, that offends them, and that's not a right or left issue. That's a kitchen table issue.
It's interesting. Also very intriguing what's happening with Ford right now.
Yeah.
And where those jobs are going. Yeah, and so maybe this addresses some of that. Who knows? Okay, we'll move on. Democrats, disappointed at their special election loss in Georgia, are lashing out at party leadership with some calling for Nancy Pelosi's ouster. Whether it's time for her to step aside, well, Representative Tim Ryan tried to, at least. And 7 months after the election, Hillary Clinton is still just as unpopular today as she was right after 2016. That's rare for losing candidates, who usually see a boost in their support after the election. So what's behind the continued dislike for Hillary?
All right, well, in the next half hour or so, we could get some big news in the way of possibly at least three GOP senators planning to release announcements in opposition of the new Senate GOP health care proposal. That obviously could be crucial, as you heard from Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill just a little while ago. That would be enough to change things here. So we are expecting an announcement on behalf of those three GOP senators sometime in the next half hour or so. We'll bring that to you when we get it.
Democrats are lashing out at their own party after that loss in the Georgia special election. One Democratic operative is quoted by Politico saying, "We no longer have a party caucus capable of riding this wave. We have 80-year-old leaders and 90-year-old ranking members. This isn't a party, it's a giant assisted living center, complete with field trips, gym, dining room, and attendance." Many of the rank and file are blaming House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, you're laughing, for Georgia and for a lot of their losses. Congresswoman Kathleen Rice saying it's time for her to go.
Nancy Pelosi was a great speaker. She is a great leader, but her time has come and gone. Yes, she's a great fundraiser, but if the money that we are raising with her through her leadership is not helping us win elections, then we have to have this difficult conversation now.
But President Trump tweeting about Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, quote, "I certainly hope the Democrats do not force Nancy P. out. That would be very bad for the Republican Party. And please let crying Chuck stay." While no leadership change is imminent, Leader Pelosi was asked about those comments from some in her party. Watch.
Some. We always have this discussion. One is one, two is a couple, three is a few, some. But I feel very confident in the support that I have in my caucus. No, my timing is not about them. My comments is about the issues that we're here to fight.
Okay, I've got to start with you. Obviously, you were laughing at Tim Ryan's quote about the Democratic Party being like an old person's assisted living home.
Well, actually, the leadership is. Look, I've met Tim Ryan. I've interviewed him. He's actually a very accomplished guy. He falls in the line of more of a centrist Democrat in a lot of his policies. But he will never be allowed to rise in the Democrat Party because the progressive leadership under Nancy Pelosi is going to turn it over to the Keith Ellisons. And Tim Ryan, who's from Ohio, who has, good potential to lead that party in a new direction, really come to the table, will never be given that chance. Nancy Pelosi, you heard her. That's hubris. That's power. That's saying you're not pushing me anywhere. From the D'Alessandros to Pelosi, they weren't going anywhere in Baltimore. Look at Baltimore, and Pelosi's not going anywhere.
I do not, with all due respect, I do not think we're turning the party over to the Keith Ellisons. I think we are looking at people like Joe Crowley, who's from just down the street in Queens, people like Seth Moulton, who's a veteran, served in Iraq, understands the military, national security issues. He's from Massachusetts. It may be time for new leadership. I agree. And there are people out there, and it's not the Keith Ellisons or Elizabeth Warrens or Bernie Sanders.
But Marie, Keith Ellison is the deputy. He is the next guy in line at the DNC. The party leadership is part in his hands. And you have Perez. You have Perez and Ellison, who are very much in line with the Obama progressives. And this fight between the Clinton wing of old and the progressive wing of new does not include the Tim Ryans of the world.
I don't think, looking from inside the party, I just don't think that's true.
We've got to go to some sound from Tim Ryan that was talking about Nancy Pelosi being used in the Georgia election.
It's going to be more challenging, certainly. You see these commercials that tie these candidates to Leader Pelosi. So we're asking candidates in these deep red districts to battle the Republican Party. We've got a lot of energy in our base, which is very exciting for a lot of us to see that on the ground. But you got to beat the Republican, and you got to carry this very toxic Democratic brand on your back, too. That's a tough thing to ask a candidate running for Congress.
You have someone within your own party calling your brand toxic. Sandra.
Yeah, and I spoke with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell yesterday, who I pressed her, and as much as she did not want to be critical of Nancy Pelosi, she would not support her. So even those that aren't publicly speaking out saying it's time for leadership change, like you pretty much just saw there, others are just kind of remaining silent and not supporting her. So there's obviously a huge problem. While Tim Ryan went as far as calling it toxic, I don't know. Are you going to openly acknowledge the problem, Marie Harf?
Well, I think we all focus on Nancy Pelosi. As I've said many times on this couch, the bigger issue is getting the message and the policies right for people in middle America.
Leadership isn't important?
Absolutely. And I just said I think that we should change our leadership, too. But
you said maybe.
We can't just focus on that. We have to look at all of it. I don't actually think anyone should be freaking out about losing a House seat that is +9 on the Republican side.
I don't think that's why you should be freaking out. You know why you should be freaking out? Because if you look at the total number over the last few years, it's over 1,000 seats across the country.
And I don't disagree with you.
Including the White House.
I don't disagree with you. And I think going into 2018, where there are dozens of seats of people that is much closer in terms of Democrat-Republican split, House seats that went district-wise for Hillary Clinton. House Republicans who are going to have to defend voting for a bill President Trump called mean. There's a lot more room there politically, and we have to figure out the message.
Do you think Tim Ryan's frustrated
leadership.
that he can't get more acknowledgement from his own party?
You used the perfect example in the Dingles. John Dingell takes the seat from his father, who dies young at 27. Debbie Dingell, his wife, gets the seat. If she serves what is the average term in Congress, that district will be represented by the Dingells for 1 century, 100 years.
All right, we have to
think
move on.
about that. The leadership in the Democrat Party is that example.
All right, we have to move on. 7 months after the presidential election, Hillary Clinton remains as unpopular today as she was right after the 2016 race. A new poll by Gallup finds just 41% of Americans view her favorably. That's the same number that felt that way in December. Meantime, we're learning that the Democratic National Committee raised just $4 million last month, making it their worst May on record for fundraising since 2003. Compare that to the Republican National Committee, which raised nearly $11 million during that same period, setting a new post-presidential record. So I'm going to start with you, Marie. So lowest amount of fundraising since I was in high school. The problem with Hillary Clinton right now is she hasn't gone away.
I agree.
She's still campaigning. She's still doing interviews. In order for people to miss you and to be nostalgic for you, you have to leave. You have to actually do something else. She's still on the campaign trail. Her daughter is vociferously tweeting in a way she didn't even do when her mother was running for president. I think it's absolutely bizarre. I've said that many times on air, and I actually think it's really hurting your party.
I think, and I've said this many times on air too, I do not think Hillary Clinton is the future of our party, and I would like her to be much less vocal and less public.
Have you called her to tell her that?
I'm not sure she'd take my calls right now.
Have you given her the map to the woods to send her back?
But I think that our party, and you know, speaking about what we were just talking about Nancy Pelosi, building on that, we need to figure out who the leaders are. And one of the excuses Pelosi supporters have used for a long time is that she is a good fundraiser. Clearly, we are not hitting our fundraising marks. Clearly, we need new leadership. And that comes from people, like I said, the good Joe Crowleys, the Tim Ryans, the Seth Moultons, the Kirsten Gillibrands of the world.
Look at the example of Georgia, though. It's not just about the fundraising and the money.
No.
It's about the content of the message and the ability for the messenger to reach the public without cussing at them. And don't pretend like that's not offensive, because it really is.
Well, Georgia,
but just to interject in this, it's also historically unprecedented for you not to be able to channel the momentum into votes, especially in special elections like this. Normally, there is historically referendums on presidents that are just recently elected. I believe in every special election except under President Bush after 9/11. So that should be the big warning sign to Democrats right now, that just simply being anti-Trump is not translating to votes.
So I don't think that the glass is totally full or totally empty in terms of Georgia. It is a +9 district. You can't buy 9 percentage points with $25 million. That's just not how it works. You need a message, and that's a lot of Republicans to turn. And a lot of Republicans to turn. Karen Handel, remember, never had to vote on Trump Care. It will be very different in 2018 when there are incumbents coming home. Let's say they haven't accomplished everything they promised they would accomplish. Let's say they're still saddled with this Trump Care bill, and maybe some people's premiums do go up. Karen Handel isn't a good representative of what Republicans are going to face in 2018 across the, I don't think.
So going back to Hillary Clinton, because that's I mean, she's had a lot of time to think about this. She's taken a lot of long strolls in the woods with Bill, and I mean, they've had a lot of time to debrief, and I don't understand why they don't look and acknowledge, because we haven't seen much acknowledgement of what the mistakes were and what the failures were and why they happened. Why not look back on those and help share those with the party, help guide the party?
Because that's not what the Clintons are about. Let's call it what it is. The Clinton Foundation was designed to be the money-making arm for the Clintons. Look at Clinton Cash for what it is. Peter Schweitzer wrote about it. We've put this out for years. You know, Harris hit the point earlier that Democrats need to pay attention to. You've lost over 1,000 seats, your state legislatures. You're losing governorships. We've got younger governors like Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, youngest governor in the nation. We continue to grow that base. That is the voting base that will make determinations of state representatives and of course at the congressional level. And that will control the future of either party who wins the lower levels.
That's right.
All right, stay tuned. Vintage Trump. That's how people are describing his Iowa rally last night. The president bringing back some of his greatest hits that propelled